The Primarchs are the strongest men that ever lived, if indeed the demigod sons of the Emperor of Mankind can be called men. And each has their own unique, special powers. But they are not all powerful, infallible, or beyond the touch of corruption by any means, even the Loyalists. Still, the Emperor gave each one unique strengths, or perhaps those strengths were intrinsic to the natures of the warp entities he infused into those super soldier bodies he crafted. So let's take a look at just what the greatest of those strengths are for each of the Loyalist Primarchs in turn, finishing off this 4-part series on the strengths and weaknesses of the Primarchs. First, we need to talk about the Lord of Caliban, the Knight of Nihilus, the Primarch of the First Legion, the Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson. The Lion is interesting as he's basically two different guys and acts quite differently depending on what era we're looking at. Heresy-era Lion is strong in 1,000 ways, but to me, beyond being the greatest fighter of all time and rivaled only by Sanguinius and Fulgrim, is not his greatest strength. A lot of Primarchs are great fighters, and all of them are physical powerhouses. So when we look a bit further than surface level at the first, we see some excellent character traits and a few fun flaws, but to me, above all others, is his sense of responsibility, feeling the weight of his actions. Look at how bad he felt about Conrad Kurz going apeshit across Ultramar. The Lion felt the weight of that and carried the burden of that responsibility in his heart. Other Primarchs, for the most part, didn't tend to internalize their failures and carry their weight like the Lion did. And I think this is a strength rather than a weakness, and it makes him more human in more ways than many of his brothers are. Sure, all the Primarchs exist in a weird quasi-state, somewhere between gods and men, but the Lion had that element that made him that much closer to human. Too bad he didn't understand us that well, and he didn't extend what he was internalizing outward, and kept his humanity inside. Otherwise, Lion could have ended up with a relationship with humans that looked more like Vulcans, rooted in compassion. Lion only has a spark of that fire that the Lord of Drakes has. But by the Warhammer 40k era, the Lion is a whole other animal, and he did a lot of character growth and development when he was in his long nap. The Lion fed that flame while he was sleeping, and doubled down on his personal responsibility and his role as protector of humanity. So he became stronger in what I said was his 30k era greatest strength, but he also came back with his Forest Walk ability, something that cannot be underestimated nor downplayed. Forest Walk is extremely overpowered. He's the Green Knight of the Warhammer 40k setting, lore-wise and on the tabletop, though he's kind of a mashup of King Arthur and the Green Knight both, as we see in Son of the Forest. But come on, it is extreme to say the least, that he can just forest walk to anywhere he wants or needs to be in the galaxy. Seriously crazy. We'll have to see just what he can do with that, and hopefully we will soon. But this power is virtually unrivaled, and we haven't even begun to see the potential uses of it. Next, we come to the 5th Legion's Primarch, the Kagan, Jagatai of the White Scars, the man who literally personifies speed, the fastest reflexes in the galaxy. But there's more to him than that. To me, it is the Khan's common sense that takes the place as his greatest strength. Jagatai sees the lie of the land, and he navigates it accordingly. Is it the lay of the land? Whatever. He doesn't get distracted by obstacles in his way. He deduces the best way around them or through them, and then proceeds accordingly. The Khan is practical, but he also enjoys life and going fast, lives to ride, for the hunt, and the best things in life. To crush the enemies, see them driven before him, and to hear the lamentations of the women. But he's not going to get played, especially by exploitations of his emotions and his passions. Khan has the best moral compass of all the Primarchs in some ways, as it is directly tied to his common sense. And he's got that in spades. I think this is why so many people like the character so much. He's relatable, as we can see where he's coming from, and the logic behind what he does is solid. The Khan might have a thunderstorm in his chest when it comes to his emotions, but he overrules that storm with his mental focus and strength time after time. I think if he was led by his base emotions rather than his logic and practicality, he would have sided with Horus in the end. Coming to the 6th Primarch, Leman Russ, we see a guy that is so OCD he can't help but fixate all his focus on one thing, and it is his loyalty to the Emperor. Russ is one of the only Primarchs to get to see the truth about the nature of themselves. Russ knows what the Primarchs are made of, and it was a horror that disturbed him to his core. Still, he's unquestioningly loyal. Like the Lion, Sanguinius, or Dorn, he's beyond reproach. And most consider his greatest strength to be that extreme loyalty. But to me, it's his rapaciousness. Once he has the scent, he's on the hunt. Nothing can shake this dog off. Any leg he decides to hump, he's going to town on. Any foe he faces, he's giving his all, unto death. Russ is an interesting character. One of my favorites. But he's like that one friend that's an alcoholic that always blacks out and does dumb shit by the end of the night. I think that sometimes he trips over his own feet trying to be as obedient as possible. Commendable as it is, it can be a problem for him. But his focus, his attention to one thing, his ability to get anything done because he only knows how to obey his father, how to succeed or die trying, that is what Leman Russ's greatest strength is. Where other Primarchs could be called stubborn or inflexible, I would call Russ hyper-focused. The Primarch of the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists, Rogal Dorn, is defined mostly by his implacability. The guy is wrath incarnate and he cannot be broken. It's hard to even reason with the guy. As focused and one-track minded as Russ is, Dorn almost even doubles down on that. He's great at everything. From soldiering, all the way to being a warrior. And he's got a huge emotional range, from anger, all the way to wrath. No, but seriously, Dorn is more stubborn than an anvil. And this is his greatest strength as far as I can tell. Think of when he was tempted, taunted, and endlessly tormented by Khorne in the Infinite Desert, next to the Vietnam Memorial. Khorne may as well have been talking to the wall itself. Has any other Primarch ever defied a god? Another one of the great fighters, but Dorn could lose his cool in a big way. Part of what I like about him. Still, I think implacable, stubborn tenacity is his greatest strength. It saw him through everything, all the way up to the death of the Emperor and his placement on the Golden Throne. Not even his completely over-the-top will could save him from the grief that tore the Primarch apart in the wake of the greatest tragedy in the history of mankind. Still, though, I think this is his greatest strength, but it is a bit of a double-edged sword as it is what Perturabo baited him with. Next, we come to the Great Angel himself, the Primarch of the 9th Legion, the Blood Angels, the Revenant Legion. How does one pick a greatest strength when dealing with total perfection? I would have to say that his precognition was his great strength as much as it was a curse, since Sanguinius knew that it was Horus who was going to slay him. Every other fight he was ever in had lesser stakes than life or death for him. And he got into some of the most major fights in the entire setting. It must be a load off your shoulders to know that you'll survive even when you're going against bloodthirsters, titans, and other Primarchs. That is until you end up in the fight that your precognition has shown you will be your end and your death. This power cannot be underestimated. Sanguinius knew nobody could touch him, and he leaned into that hard. Sure, he was battered, beaten up a bit, and exhausted by the time he fought Horus, but he faced battles that none of his other brothers would have walked away from, and he dominated time after time. Sanguinius was untouchable, and his power was truly a curse. To see your own end must be insanity-inducing. Just ask the Cyclops in the 80s movie Crawl! But in the meantime, it was super overpowered and provided the foundation for the most epic engagements and feats of martial prowess in all of Warhammer lore, Horus Heresy or otherwise. It makes Sanguinius and his fate so much more tragic in many ways. The Primarch of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands, Ferrus Manus is next, and when it comes to Ferrus Manus, I'll just double down on what most people say about him, as I can't find anything that defines him more than his iron will. And it was, ironically, also his undoing, as it played into his stubbornness and his need for revenge. One can't will victory, you have to carve it out of the corpses of your enemies. But Ferrus was another of those guys that was just too stubborn, too full of himself, and it led to his demise. His willpower was so strong that even when he was totally losing his shit and hell-bent on revenge at Istvan V, his brothers Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard and Vulkan, the Lord of Drakes of the Salamander's Legion, both fell in line and followed him into what was meant to be an extinction event for 3 legions, simply because Ferrus exuded that willpower that only comes from absolute certainty. Too bad in the case of the Dropsite Massacre that he was wrong. Still, Ferrus had a will of iron. And as we know, iron doesn't bend, not like steel does. It holds rigid until it breaks, until it shatters. Ferrus may have just been the only Primarch that had a will that could rival his brother Horus Lupercal's own, though. Ironically enough. Next, we come to the most popular Primarch, the Lord of Ultramar, Genesire of the 13th Legion, Roboute Guilliman of the Ultramarines. Guilliman is good at many things, but he's one of those jack-of-all-trades kind of guys. But the one thing he does master, he masters the fuck out of. Logistics, tactics, politics, frontline leadership, all of that goes through the Primarch's head at once, all day, every day. Guilliman is the greatest multitasker that ever lived. He uses this power to micromanage his empire and the Imperium of Man. It isn't because the men and women around him are incompetent, but that he's just more competent than everyone else. As the son of the Emperor, he was created that way. And Guilliman is the kind of guy that wants things done, and he wants them done right. So often finds himself taking the reins on nearly everything. He truly is such a micromanager that he could easily retire from the Imperium and being Imperial Regent in his father's stead and go off to be the CEO of IKEA. He's already color-coded for it, and I think that it would be a good move and the right thing for his resume. Nobody's gonna outplan, outprepare, and out-supply chain Roboute Guilliman. This guy has a million things on his mind at all times and masterfully navigates that situation without his head exploding or getting an aneurysm. And it is this particular skill set and super ability that the Imperium seems to be in most need of by the current Warhammer 40k timeline. Nobody is as capable of running the Imperium as Guilliman, but too bad he's inherited a dying shell of an Imperium that has long been in a steady, slow, very slow decline. Then again, if anyone can resuscitate this dying bitch, it's Roboute. I don't think that the Lion is gonna like his leadership style, but then again, historically the Lion never has. Nor has he ever been able to do anything about it. Guilliman will outplay him politically if it comes to a power grab situation. The Lion's only hope, and he knows this as he knows his brother, is on the field of battle. Next we come to Vulkan, the Lord of Drakes, Primarch of the Salamanders, the 18th Legion. And to me, even though Vulkan was the physically strongest Primarch, I think his greatest strength was actually his compassion, being a caring nurturer, granola bars, hugs, and all that hippie shit. Vulkan cared about baseline humans in a way that no other Primarch did. Do you think there's a single Iron Hands Marine out there that would lay down their own life to save a baseline human? 1 million of us? A whole planet? Nope. And the Salamanders are the only legion to treat us as the very thing for which they fight and die. Vulkan might be a perpetual, he might be the strongest Primarch, but he has a heart unlike any of the others. He cares unlike any of his brothers, and this is what makes him uniquely him. He'll boop every snoot and hug every friend because this is just who Vulkan really is. Sure, some of the other Primarchs might not have utter contempt for all of humanity, but Vulkan actually likes us, and would lay down his life and the lives of the legionnaires that serve under him to protect us. Unlike any other legion, except for the Alpha Legion, who are always good to regular humans, but they have ulterior motives to say the least. I think Vulkan's love for humanity is genuinely sincere though, and I think this is what gave his mind the drive and the will to endure, despite the many horrific events he was put through. They might have driven him a bit mad, but at least he could still function. That couldn't be said of most other beings in the galaxy, had they gone through what he has, including his brother Primarchs. Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard, the Primarch of the 19th Legion, is next, and this one is super easy. It's the ability everyone wishes they had at some point in their life. It is his power of invisibility. I mean, anyone would love that power. It's super overpowered on a Primarch too when you think about it. Sure, the Blood Crow and Icona Sharokin and many other Raven Guard characters can Wraith Slip like their Gene Father, but nobody has it down like Corvus Corax, and nobody can turn straight invisible right out in the open like he can. This ability is so overpowered that I personally consider it to be the strongest of all the abilities of all the Primarchs. In any scene, in any Warhammer book, well, 40k and Horus Heresy at least, Corvus Corax could be in the room with the characters, just chilling, all invisible, being totally stealth. And that was before he went into the warp to be a thorn in Lorgar's side for millennia. Corvus Corax has a power that anyone in the galaxy would kill for, and he plays it down so much. But then again, maybe he's learned to use it to its fullest potential. Like I said, he could be standing right next to anyone, anytime, ever, in the entire setting. And last we come to Omegon, the Primarch of the 20th Legion, the Alpha Legion, who admittedly are both loyal and traitor depending on what they're doing or what acts they need to enact in order to perpetuate their agenda. But Omegon makes this list as he's shown to be loyal a bit more than his brother Alpharius, despite recent lore like Dropsite Massacre peeling off the band-aid and screaming loyal in our faces. And he has an ability that is almost as strong as Corvus Corax's Wraith Slipping invisibility trick. He has the ability to blend in, to become anyone, to be perceived as he intends to be perceived. If the Alpha Legion Primarchs want you to see one person, they can. If they want you to perceive both of them, they can do that too. If they want you to see them as a regular Astartes, they can do that. And it has even been hinted at that they can make one see them as regular baseline, unaugmented, even unarmored humans. No matter what Alpharius Omegon really looks like, he can paint a picture in your head making him look like whoever or whatever he wants you to see him as. This is super powerful stuff. Not quite on the same level as Corax, but not far off at all. They can't be invisible, but the Hydras don't need to be. You'll remember that you saw someone, or that you talked to someone, but your memory won't match the truth that you saw the Hydra. So any person in the setting could be Omegon. You think that's Yarick that returned? That's what Omegon wants you to think. You think Guilliman is the Lord Regent of the Imperium? That's because Omegon wants you to see him as the Lord Regent of the Imperium. See what I mean? Who needs to be invisible when you're the 20th Legion's Primarch? Truly an overpowered ability, but one that is more subtle than the powers of most Primarchs. Anyway, those are my takes, so this wraps up the final video in this series on the strengths and weaknesses of the Primarchs. If you haven't checked out the other 3 parts in this series, please do so if you want to hear my personal takes on the traitor's strengths and the weaknesses of all the Primarchs on both sides. Anyway, thanks for watching. I appreciate it.